There's this idea that the Anthropocene is something that planet Earth has done to itself. And he therefore comes up with the idea that to counteract the negative aspects of Anthropocene, humans should invent technology that's kind of terraforming and managing the planet on a computational level.
Welcome to Flowcast, a music and science podcast. Today we'll meet Möckel, talking about the relationship between technology and the natural world, challenging us to think about human intervention in ways that go far beyond what we can see. Tell us about you and what you do.
So I'm Luis. I'm originally a designer, but currently I work a lot on sound ecology and acoustic ecology. I kind of slipped into that topic through my thesis. There was a project on the acoustic ecology of technophonic sounds, some sounds that are made from machines. And this interest for sound basically comes out of a personal interest for music and sound, because I also have another music project that's called Abusing Machines that actually comes really more from like music making and seeing music as a hedonistic part of art.
And that's your personal project?
Yeah, it comes actually more from the rave and techno scene.
Okay.
Kind of leaving that as I'm not really interested in that scene anymore.
So you said that one of your work is around sound ecology, which sounds to me very fitting with our project.
Yeah.
Is there a match or is just nominal?
No, for sure that's a match. I think that was the reason why I decided to collaborate on this project. I think for me personally, this combination of interests of technology and sound and ecology comes from one side from my personal interest for music, and on the other side from my education as a designer, that I very early went on an ecological branch in my studies already. And at some point I realized that there is this field existing that's called acoustic ecology, where the domain of sound and the domain of ecology are being combined, which I think is still actually a fairly young discipline. I mean, it's been around for some decades, and it's quite growing lately, I have the feeling. But it's still a very niche discipline of people who research ecosystems through listening. I mean, the whole history of ecology is very visual in a way. I'm very interested in new ways of knowing and new ways of producing knowledge. And this combination of listening to a system and therefore gaining knowledge about it has kind of sparked my interest. That's how I ended up there. Yeah.
I see how this fits our project, because you were given not just a field recording that we've taken right there, but also some images, some geomorphological context, and a time-lapse video made with images taken from a satellite and generated by our partners at the University of Würzburg. So I was wondering, did you use any of the visual and contextual material to convert the ecological aspects of this project into sound?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I've been thinking about that because this Cartesian worldview of looking at the world from above, to map the world through satellite imagery and put it into a grid, is something that I believe can be quite counteracted through sound, because visual or satellite imagery have quite a spatial dimension of a landscape. They tell you where something is. But sound actually can do the same thing. It can tell you where, sound has a spatial dimension that can tell you where something is. This is something that actually interested me in this project, is that you gave this connection between satellite imagery and sound. And I'm really interested in trying to understand the landscape without the satellite imagery. So at some point I decided, okay, this is really cool, but if I want to understand this piece of the river from a complete sonic perspective, I should only work with sound alone and try to accomplish that. The satellite imagery gave me some inspiration, but I haven't used it to produce anything for the sound piece.
What was your segment? Can you remind me?
There was segment 13, the hydropower plant.
So the sound you were given was the very loud and powerful noise of water going through this enormous pipe?
Exactly, yeah. But it felt like quite a piece of noise recording only.
We traveled along the entirety of the river to collect field recordings. Two things I wanted to avoid. One was to have all sounds of water, because otherwise I could have just walked to the nearest river near to my house and do several recordings there and pretend that was the Lech. But also I wanted to avoid the white noise effect. So I wanted to avoid recording a waterfall or a river going under a bridge, which, if you're there, you see what's around you. So the sound makes more sense. But once you're home and you just listen to the sound, is just white noise. But I did that in your segment because standing on top of those, it was like a Y-shaped pipe, and it was enormous. And you were standing right on top of it, and you were 2-3 meters away from it. And it was so powerful that I thought, this recording is going to be just noise, but that's how it's supposed to be. Because I wanted to convey the scary powerfulness of the water being constricted into these pipes and rushing through at a high speed.
Yeah. You can definitely hear the amount of power that's in that field recording. I was once in the harbor of Rotterdam and I was listening to this industrial soundscape of ships being loaded and unloaded. And I also had this feeling that you can literally hear the amount of force that's necessary to move this amount of weight around. So yeah, I quite like this recording. That's why I was applying for Segment 13.
You did turn into a kind of industrial landscape.
Yeah, in a way, because I'm very interested in this relationship between ecology and technology and how that is being sonified in a moment like a hydropower plant. Because I also think that this separation between nature and technology is like a very constructed idea. I'm not sure if I can oppose this idea onto like a sonic ontology, or if you want to say so, that there is this separation. I think that's an idea that we have come up with. Like differentiate between nature and technology also puts a bit of a hierarchy between these two systems.
Like one being on top of the other.
Yeah, and there's, very often there's this differentiation between good and bad if we talk about technology. And this whole idea is also existing in this idea of the Anthropocene, which is, of course, a very attractive idea if we start to think about all the problems that have derived from the Anthropocene, or if you want to say Capitalocene or so. But there's this author, what's his name? He wrote this book, Terraforming.
Johannes Butler.
No, I think he's maybe referenced in that book. Anyway, there's this idea that the Anthropocene is something that planet Earth has done to itself. And he therefore comes up with the idea that to counteract the negative aspects of Anthropocene, humans should invent technology that's kind of terraforming and managing the planet on a computational level, because that's how planet Earth can undo the negative effects of the Anthropocene again. And what's interesting about that thought is I believe that he's including the element of man-made technology into the ecological system of Earth, which is a bit of a turn in this differentiation between what is nature and what is technology. Yeah, I'm very interested in these like shifts, and when they become sonified in, for example, a hydropower plant, what happens then?
They're very much fitting with, especially, the segment that you selected, where of course, you've got this massive power plant with these scary pipes and water rushing through it. It felt like an angry wild animal in a cage. You could feel this primordial energy trying to get out of this man-made constriction. But then you see also all the company cars were parked outside, and on the cars was written, "This car is powered by this power plant." So it's clean energy. So it looks like a very impactful structure. But then the result is that the cars and possibly the nearby towns are not powered by coal. And at the same time, at the back of the dam, there is a reservoir where fish, birds, they recreated their habitat. So yeah, maybe technology is not exactly opposed to nature.
Yeah, I don't quite think so. And at the same time, I think there are, of course, technological problems that come with infrastructures like hydropower plants. And as soon as we start to perceive them through sounds, we discover problems that we would never discover when we just look at them from satellites. Or if you would only focus on like the materialistic side of ecological problems like water pollution or CO2 exhaustion. That's this project that I did before that was dealing about sonic footprints, to look into how objects that travel the world along a supply chain kind of leave behind a sonic trace of industrial noise that produce invisible ecological problems. And I think that's the case for many man-made infrastructures. Because all these sounds, of course, they have ecological agency because they kind of change the sonic habitat of animals who, for example, communicate through sound. And I'm very sure that also happens in the river. If there's a hydropower plant that suddenly produces a constant hum of certain frequencies, definitely will affect a lot of animals who live in that water ecosystem. But that's a very invisible ecological element that's for someone who thinks about energy consumption as only problematic as long as it exhausts CO2. You would never come up with the idea that like a hydropower plant can also be an ecological disaster, but in a sonic way.
Martina, who I did this project now, she's working here in Berlin on a project that studies the impact of artificial lights on the habitat. The lights in a harbor, how is this impacting the fish, or the lights of a city or an industrial area, how this impacting the animals living nearby, nocturnal animals that, rely on darkness to hunt. So probably the same thing applies to sounds, right? Did I understand correctly?
Very much, I believe.
That factory doesn't not only have LED lights that go all night, but they also makes noise.
Yeah.
So animals who rely on silence to escape predators become vulnerable.
Yeah, and then on top of that comes the fact that a lot of animals have a hearing range that goes beyond what we as humans can perceive. I once came across a paper that was researching the reproductive behavior of crickets who live nearby highways. And crickets, for a funny reason, can hear ultrasound. They have like a very sensitive hearing ability. And as we all know, they communicate very much through sound, as all the summer nights are filled with their sound.
Yeah.
And crickets who live nearby highways have less offspring because, of course, if they find their mating partners through sound and they live in a very noisy environment, they will not find anyone. So there's actually a very strong ecological agency of noise that goes down to the reproductive level of species. And if we go into a water ecosystem like the river, or for example in the ocean where whales communicate through sound over hundreds of kilometers, any kind of noise source will affect their ability to communicate, to reproduce. I mean, now I'm going very much again into the problematic domain of technology. Not to say that this is the only consequence it has, but definitely I think there's problems.
So really fascinating. So if you got anything that's worth reading about this, that book, Terraforming, if you can remember
the name is Benjamin Bratton who wrote it. I mean, this is not really about sound, but it's about this conception that technology is something that planet Earth has kind of also done to itself. If you would, for example, perceive the sound of certain animals as their piece of technology, that they sonically interact with their own environment, then we also have to perceive the sounds that humans produce with our technology as part of this sonic ecology. But the problem probably with emerging technologies is just the speed, that this orchestration of animal sounds, they have had millions of years to evolve, and now we have
Exactly, we're not following the pacing of natural evolution.
Yeah, that's kind of also why I named the project now Entrophony, because I'm kind of intrigued by this idea of entropy, that once you put it inside of a system, it stays there. I kind of took it from the word technophony, like this term that describes technology-made sounds, but transfer it to the term of entropy, because how can we sonify this effect that we keep putting more and more physical energy into a system like a river that cannot leave anymore? Like how does this entropy accumulate and how can we sonify that? That was kind of the idea behind the piece. Maybe that's why it sounds so industrial.
And now let's listen to Louis' composition, Entrophony.